Hello and welcome to another edition of Hot Topic. This week I'm joined by Chris Haskins, Lord Haskins, former boss of Northern Foods and current chairman of the Humberside LEP, the Local Enterprise Partnership. Chris, welcome. Thank you very much for coming in, as always. First of all, we'll talk about the big politics here. Last week's Conservative Party conference, an awful lot you just have to put down to luck, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think she's probably the unluckiest Prime Minister we've ever had. You do make your own luck, mind you, and I suppose Churchill was less lucky in 1940, but he did make his own luck. He won the war. She's in some difficulties.
I don't think we can compare a bad cold with the Second World War, but nothing that went wrong with that speech, or nothing that has been making the headlines that went wrong with that speech, was really her fault, was it?
No, it wasn't. I don't count that as being part of the bad luck. I mean, the bad luck was becoming Prime Minister at the time she did. It was a very, very tricky time to become Prime Minister, and I wouldn't have wished it on my worst enemy. We'll
talk a little bit more about the contents of that speech rather than its delivery in a moment. But first of all, let's bring it right back home. How's business at the LEP, at the Enterprise Partnership? Are you getting a lot of people that you're being able to help, the people applying to you for assistance?
The economy in the Humber generally is going quite well, everything slightly to everybody's surprise. The national economy, of course, is going slightly better than people thought, but not great. But I think the Humber economy is really surprising people. It's going forward very successfully, getting quite a lot of investment in. People are much more confident, the business community is much more confident than it's been. So those signs are encouraging. There is a bit of a shadow, of course, over the future, but if we can keep away from that shadow, then I think things look pretty exciting here.
Which sectors are growing fastest? Which things are
well, the energy business is obviously booming.
And that's renewable energy.
Yeah, renewable energy, and yeah, some of it's obviously going wrong, but offshore wind particularly is exciting, and the maintenance and all that sort of stuff. The ports are up and down, but they're picking up quite a lot of business now from Dover. The food business here is doing pretty steadily, food and agriculture doing pretty steadily. You've got things like the caravan business on the North Bank doing very well, the kitchen business, Wren Kitchens, doing very well on the South Bank. So, I mean, it's quite an encouraging picture. A lot of new investment. The Siemens, the Reckitt's have come here. There's more coming to Grimsby, I hope, in the near future.
You say, for instance, just to take one example of that list, a very impressive list as well, the port's doing very well, the port's on the Humber. That's our gain is Dover's lost and Harwich's lost, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why are our ports more popular than those?
Well, I think it's because the Dover's got bunged up and people have had some very bad experiences being delayed for a long time. They feel it's very vulnerable. The distance, the change in time coming to our ports is not all that much. If you've got materials coming to the north of England, it seems a bit daft to be putting them through Dover. That's what's been happening in the past. I think people are beginning to realise that. So there's a container business building up in the Humber estuary, which has never been there before.
The companies that are coming here, well, that's a very good reason for the port companies to come here. I suppose that's a bit of a monopoly with ABP, isn't it?
Yeah.
But other companies, and you mentioned other sectors of the economy, why are they coming here? What have we got that attracts them? Well, are they starting up here, or are they coming from other parts of the country?
Well, some of them are setting up. I mean, in Hull, Reckitt Bencover is a very interesting example, because the original Reckitt's company started in Hull, was a Hull-based company, and had its headquarters. I first came to Hull 40 or 50 years ago. Its headquarters were here, and then they moved away to London, to the south. And, you know, 2 or 3 years ago, I thought we'd never see another Reckitt's investment here. But they've suddenly decided, very prudently, to centre all their worldwide research and development in the over-the-counter type of health things, like the Lemsips and all, in Hull. And they've spent 100 million, they're going to spend another 100 million. There's a Reckitt spin-off in Hull, which is doing drugs, high-risk drugs. Again, a legacy of, they came from Hull, and why did they stay here? Smith and Nephew, which is another Hull company originally, have decided to invest in research and develop in high-tech stuff. So there is a bit of that going on. And then, of course, on the South Bank, I mean, the attraction is the North Sea and the access to the wind farms on the North Sea.
And the shipping lanes, of course.
And the shipping lanes.
I'm always banging on about the point that the Humber is an extension of the Rhine, and it is that easy communication with Europe. But communication with Europe we'll talk about a little later. Just to go back to Mrs. May's speech, she proudly said that she was going to solve the housing crisis by building 5,000 new homes. That's not enough to solve a housing crisis. If we have such a healthy economy here, we're going to need to house a lot more people. We've got a little bit of development of housing with the infrastructure that goes with it in Grimsby, and a little bit in Scunthorpe that's now become rather contentious on Scunthorpe, on North Lincolnshire County Council. How on earth are we going to build enough houses to give homes to the people we want to come here and generate our economy?
Well, you mean the housing situation around the Humber differs a lot from one part to another. So, I mean, Grimsby has had a difficult time attracting developers to Grimsby because the property values are so low. And if property values aren't high and rising, then developers aren't interested. And so we've got some work to do there. There are signs that it's picking up. Scunthorpe, of course, has got a major housing development taking place there. The East Riding on the other side of the river is full of houses. I mean, they're trying to keep people back. And Hull, which has traditionally been a big housing problem, people are now going back into Hull, buying houses in Hull. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a huge problem. There's a huge housing difficulty, which I think the government, Mrs. May, talked about it this week. I thought she was going to give the housing councils large amounts of money to develop council housing again. But she hasn't done that. She's given them a bit, but it's a step in the right direction.
There's a possibility that there's a virtuous circle. If we take Grimsby and the developments around Tulbar as an example, and I don't want to generalise from the particular, but the reason that the land is not likely to appreciate very much is because there's low demand for it. And the reason there's low demand for it is because there aren't enough people who want land enough to pay for it. Now that would indicate that people are leaving Grimsby, that there are too few people and too much supply, as it were, of land. The way to reverse that is if you have the houses available, as the economy grows, the more people that are employed will make it more desirable to be here, and thus the demand for that land and the appreciation of those houses would return. Or have I got the wrong end of the stick entirely?
Well, I mean, that implies that the state or the council should build ahead of demand. They should create houses ahead of demand. And I mean, people can burn their fingers on that. You know, you have to get I think you really do have to get the local economy going a bit stronger, and then the housing will follow it. I don't think you can do it the other way around.
And how fast does the housing follow that strengthening of the local economy?
Oh, it should be fairly quick. You know, I think if we can get the economy, the key to it is economic growth. And Grimsby we've got a lot to do still.
Just want to talk, staying with infrastructure. The railways have all been on strike in the last little while, which is appallingly inconvenient for absolutely everybody. But we don't. Hull is better served on the railway system than the South Bank. But is the South Bank sufficient? Is the transport infrastructure generally, but especially the railway, is that sufficient?
I think the road network on the South Bank is very good, actually. I mean, it's probably as good as there is in the country. The access to the big industrial sites to and from has improved remarkably, so that isn't an issue. The rail side, again, the freight rail side is pretty good and improving. Slow, but I mean, 25% of the country's freight goes along the South Bank of the Humber. I mean, it's a huge, mainly, it has been historically, bulk loads like biomass and coal, and that is changing. But that's fine. As far as railways are concerned, railways are a bit of a modern phenomenon. If someone had said 20 years ago that the rail volume, people using rail would increase by double, which it's done the last 20, you wouldn't believe them. Now, sadly, the latest evidence on railways is that people are going off them again a bit, that the volume of people using railways in the first 6 months of this year is down 7%. That's quite frightening. Now, as far as Grimsby is concerned, yeah, sure, there's another volume issue. There should be more trains from Grimsby.
And they should be going faster, because it's an absurdly slow journey as far as Doncaster.
I would say the speed is more important in a sense. That's about the nature of the line. Speed is more important than if the speed is right and the frequency picks up, it creates its own momentum, you know. But we do have problems in Grimsby and Cleethorpes with the railways.
And that's largely because we're putting the passenger transport behind, in every sense of the word, in the freight transport, and the freight transport can't travel particularly fast, and the passenger trains have to be scheduled in between the freight trains.
Well, it's a bit of that, but it's mainly there isn't enough traffic. I mean, if I talk to the rail operators, and it's one of these things. If your service is poor, the traffic is poor. That I think we talked earlier about putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
In terms of that, I would increase the capacity of the railways and see if that creates increased demand.
Chris, we're going to have to stop there. You won't be terribly surprised that in the second half it's perfectly possible that we might find ourselves discussing Brexit. Join me again in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Hot Topic. I'm still with Chris Haskins, Lord Haskins, Chairman of the Humber Local Enterprise Partnership. Chris, we were talking about infrastructure in terms of railways a moment ago. Let's just discuss again a couple of fairly detailed aspects of the roads. In Grimsby, again, because of the toll bar developments that are in the local plan, they're going to change the toll bar junction. There's no reason why you should be particularly familiar with this, but it's a roundabout at the moment. They're going to change it to traffic lights.
Yeah.
And that's with money from the LEP, your counterpart of Lincolnshire.
Right.
Vast amounts of money. Is there an element there where if the money's available, they'll find a project to spend it on?
I don't think so. I think the demand for the money that we don't have really very much, is far greater than what we can supply.
There's a horse and cart element to this conversation, isn't
Yeah.
there? But there is also the fact that to make that change from a roundabout to traffic lights, that's predicted to take 8 months. Now, is that not ridiculous? If you've got to re-engineer a fairly simple four-way traffic junction, and that takes 8 months, that sort of attitude is bound to be an anchor on the economy.
Every road project takes longer than you could possibly imagine, and don't ask me why. I mean, it is complicated because they've got to try and keep the traffic flowing whilst they're doing it. They don't do weekend work as they do in London. They don't do overnight work as they do in London. All of those things are considered to be too expensive. So you get that. But if you think Grimsby is bad, I mean, the Castle Street in Hull is going to take 7 years to do, and its budget is just beyond belief.
I don't envy you. One final infrastructure question. Are you content, are you satisfied with the measures taken against flooding? The investment that's going in there, about £22 million is going into Orchard Park from East Riding Council.
That's the start. I mean, we've got a big project going on, investigating the scale of the problem, which is to report not till 2019, but there's 300 million earmarked to be spent between now and 2025 on flood protection right across the Humber, and we're doing a massive exercise to assess what are the priorities. They're taking a 50-year view. There's nearly £1 billion to be spent.
Well, £1 billion is a lot of money. Would it not be more sensible, we were talking about housing earlier, just to build the houses on the hills?
Well, there aren't enough hills around here, and we also need to have factories which have to be close to the estuary, and therefore we must make sure it isn't a super problem. The Dutch have been dealing with it for centuries, and look how they've done.
And in the south of Lincolnshire, which is an extension of Holland, effectively,
Exactly.
from their engineering. Now, we're talking of the Dutch, talking of foreigners. Generally, we're going to have to move on to Brexit, as we both knew we would. How will the Humber, and especially the ports I'm thinking of, how will the Humber do as those who are cheerful about Brexit say will be easy in finding new markets outside Europe?
I think that's not going to be at all easy. We've been looking at a new UK-US trade deal, which is the main one. If you're going to reduce your trade with Europe, the obvious replacement can only be the US, because they're big enough. The market is big enough to replace. And of course, bear in mind, a lot of the European stuff's going to continue it anyway. But when you look at doing a deal with the Americans, it's not so easy. The Americans are very precious about their farmers, and they will insist on the US farmers having free access to this market. That will knock our farmers sideways if we go down that route. When you're negotiating with the Americans, you're negotiating with some hard men and women, I can tell you. If you have the Canadians, we're going to learn some hard lessons from that.
Well, not only hard, but there are other words that one could use to describe the present White House, the administration there. They seem to be unwilling to want to have trade partnerships when they're putting on, what is it, a 200% tariff on airplane wings.
Correct. I mean, there's this idea that the Americans are going to champion free trade. The Americans are the arch protectionists. And what worries me about, one of the many things that worries me about Brexit, is that rather than engaging in increased trade around the world, we're going to get more protectionist. I'm afraid we're going to be driven into protectionist attitudes. We all can already see it. And that is just absolutely against what this country has been about for 200 years.
You're a farmer, and there is going to be difficulty in getting European farm workers, cheap European farm workers, coming over into Yorkshire and to Lincolnshire. How's that going to impact the agriculture sector?
Well, they're already struggling. There's no question. I mean, my next door neighbour can't get guys to drive combine harvesters, and a lot of the European workers are not coming. The numbers are reduced dramatically. Some are going away, not to come back. There are fewer new people coming. In the areas I obviously worry about farming, but I worry about the NHS. And if you take the Grimsby Hospital, I mean, 15% of all the people working the NHS come from Europe. And they are very anxious about their situation.
But the ones who are here, it's been made clear, welcome to stay. And no doubt they must have to be paid a competitive wage to do so. But will there be a need in NHS or agriculture for still more, for an increasing flow?
Well, an awful lot of these Europeans come and go. They don't come here forever. And the seasonal workers come for 3 or 4 months and go away again. So there will be that flow. There always has been that flow of people in agriculture. It used to be that the people used to come from Sheffield into Lincolnshire. That's all stopped because the people in Sheffield don't want to do these jobs anymore.
Let's move on to sort of the bigger stories here, which it is local in that it's universal and thus it affects us here. And this is this idea of nationalism. You are an Irishman who lives in the United Kingdom. And Ireland itself was part of the United Kingdom until it seceded, as it were, in 1921.
Parts of it.
Well, not all of it, apart from the top bit. Britain has seceded, as it were, or is seceding from the European Union, not liking the idea of a confederacy within Europe, but as much as it likes the idea of a confederacy within the British archipelago. And now we're watching Catalonia trying to separate itself from Spain. I would suggest, as a devil's advocate, that the political relationship has been between government and citizen, and the nationality and the state are not the same thing, and that one is not relevant to the other.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been very anxious about nationalism. I think nationalism is a dangerous horse to ride, whoever is riding it. And Irish nationalism, whether it was the country where I was brought up in, was an inward-looking protectionist force which didn't take account of internationalism. Oddly enough, Ireland has become much more international itself for the last 40 years, amazingly. And it was when I first came to Britain in 1955, I came because it was an outward-looking country which was international in its approach to things.
Because Britain was.
Britain was, yeah. And Ireland was and now it's the other way around. I'm now living in a country which is becoming more and more introverted, less and less interested in the rest of the world, more and more obsessed with its own national identity, if we like it. And I think I think it's rather sad, because it's irrelevant in today's age, because you can't turn the clock back. The world is going to be global, whether it's the communications, whether the way we travel around the world. The idea that you can sort of put up the borders and say, live behind those borders as if things were going to go back to where they were 50 years ago, as if 50 years ago was wonderful. 50 years ago when I came to England, if compared what there is now, people wouldn't put up what they had to put up with 50 years ago.
There's a difference. We're talking about Ireland separating from the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, as it was until 1921, and the referendum we had a few years ago with Scotland wishing a powerful nationalist force there. In both those cases, they were poorer parts of a unitary state wishing to separate from the richer parts of the unitary state, which you can work out the sanity of that as you choose, understanding the way that the taxation is redistributive and the Barnett formula. In a Spanish situation, though, it's the richer part of the country that's a net payer into the central pot that wants to separate and stop subsidising the rest of the poorer part of the country. I mean, I can see that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think it is the economic argument in either case. I think it's deeper than that. I mean, the Spanish issue is about a civil war there 70 years ago, where the Catalonians were at odds with the people in Madrid, you know, and it takes very little to raise that again. Of course, I mean, the Catalonians think they're wealthy. As far as, I mean, Scotland's concerned, I mean, Scotland is actually probably richer than the north of England now. So, I mean, if there was a case for devolution of powers, there should be a movement in England. I wish there was, but there isn't.
I will try to resist the temptation to mention the fact that the Catalans regret the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella back in the 1460s, the Union of Aragon with Castile.
Yeah.
That idea of devolution you mentioned, any future of that for this part of the world?
Well, there's talk now in Yorkshire of getting all the local authorities in Yorkshire, called Yorkshire and the Humber, all the local authorities are talking. The two from this side have chosen not to talk, so there's a division. Now, whether the Yorkshire conversations to bring a sort of all Yorkshire, and I'd like a all Yorkshire and Humber approach, is going to happen or not, I don't know. I've been there before. I would like it to happen, but I'm not counting my chickens.
Councillors don't seem capable of agreeing.
No, and the trouble is they're all talking about where they sit. They're not talking about the whole purpose of devolution is economic development. And if you can't make the case for economic development, forget about devolution.
Chris, we're going to have to stop there. Thanks very much for coming in. Join me again next week for another Hot Topic.